The roar of the engines came first, a deep, chest-thrumming beat that drowned out the polite chatter and clinking glasses. I stood on the perfectly manicured lawn, a sea of catered tables and silk dresses whipping around me in the sudden gale. My father, Richard, a man who believed his opinion was fact, had his face frozen in a mask of pure disbelief. His laugh died in his throat as the shadow of the matte Black Hawk passed over him. My father always said my head was in the clouds. I thought to myself, he just never imagined what I did up there. I turned to my stunned family, my voice cutting through the noise. That's my bus. Just 2 hours earlier, the scene had been one of sickeningly familiar celebration. We were at a lavish family reunion at a remote park pavilion, all for my brother Kevin, the family's undisputed golden child, who was being lauded for his promotion to senior brand strategist. My father was holding court, his voice booming with pride as he recounted Kevin's triumphs. He saw me standing quietly with a man in a discreet suit and swaggered over, clapping me hard on the shoulder. It was a gesture meant to look affectionate but feel like an anchor. "This one here," he announced to the man, "flies helicopters for the army." He paused for effect, a smirk playing on his lips. Basically a bus driver with a fancier uniform. "Can't imagine it's very demanding." The man beside me, a senior agent from the diplomatic security service there to give me a preliminary briefing on a future joint operation, offered a tight, professional smile. My father saw a simple guest. I saw the man whose team I would be responsible for keeping alive. The insult landed. Just another tally on the internal ledger of 1,000 other dismissals I had endured for years. But this time was different. I watched the agent's eyes. His polite expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A subtle shift, a flicker of professional reassessment. It was a look I was trained to recognize, the silent question of competence. A cold fury, clean and sharp, settled deep in my stomach. This wasn't just another casual slight at a family barbecue. This was a security breach. My father's ego, in its infinite need to belittle me, had just actively undermined my operational integrity before the mission had even begun. This was no longer about family drama, it was about lives. He thought he was just making another joke at my expense. He had no idea he'd just demonstrated my unreliability to a man whose team I was supposed to protect in 2 weeks. To understand the protocol I had to invoke to fix this, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. To my family, I was Avi. Avi was the quiet one, the one who was always away. She had a government job that was too complicated to explain at dinner parties, so no one really bothered to ask. Avi was a placeholder, a ghost at the table whose accomplishments were measured in their politeness and her ability to not interrupt when my brother was talking. They were comfortable with Avi. They had no idea who Valkyrie was. Valkyrie was the person I became the moment the cockpit door sealed shut. And Valkyrie was about to burn Avi's world to the ground. I remember one Christmas dinner perfectly. The air was thick with the scent of pine and roasting turkey, a manufactured warmth that never quite reached me. My brother Kevin was holding court, his hands dancing in the air as he told the dramatic tale of landing a new sparkling water account. He spoke of demographics and brand synergy as if he were describing the Normandy landings. My father hung on every word, his face beaming with a pride so intense it was almost blinding. My mother, Carol, a woman who believed family peace was a treasure to be protected at any cost, refilled Kevin's glass and urged him to tell them more about the ad campaign. Later, during a lull, I tried to connect. I mentioned I'd just finished a month-long high-altitude training exercise in the mountains. A grueling, exhausting program that pushed my skills and endurance to the absolute limit. My mother just patted my hand, her eyes already glazing over. "That's nice, dear," she said, her voice a soft wall of dismissal. Before I could say another word, she turned back to my brother. "Kevin, tell us more about the marketing budget." My father chuckled into his napkin. "Still playing with the government's expensive toys, Avi?" The internal ledger clicked another entry, the thousands they'd spent on Kevin's business degree, the car they'd co-signed for. My training, which could mean the difference between life and death, was just a game with toys. Now, contrast that with a Tuesday 3 months later. I was strapped into the command seat of my MH-60 Millions Black Hawk, call sign Valkyrie, 1. Outside, a sandstorm raged, reducing visibility to near zero. Below us, on a narrow, treacherous mountain ridge in a region I can't name, a Delta Force team was taking fire and needed extraction. The green glow of the instruments was the only light in a world of violent, howling chaos. My CO pilot, Chief Warrant Officer 5 Miller, a man with more flight hours than I had hours of sleep, spoke calmly over the internal comms. His voice was steady, but the words were ice. Valkyrie, that's a negative margin landing. The wind shear is unpredictable. He was right. A negative margin landing meant there was no room for error. The rotor blades would be inches from the cliff face. A single gust of wind at the wrong moment would send us spiraling into the abyss, taking a dozen lives with us. I took a breath, my hands steady on the controls. The shouts of the operators on the ground were faint but urgent over the radio. In that moment, there was no Avi. There was only the mission. "We don't leave them behind, Miller," I said, my voice as calm as his. Adjusting for shear. "I've got this." I guided the multi-million-dollar aircraft down, fighting the wind with tiny, precise movements. The helicopter groaned, the landing gear skidded on the rock, but it held. For 2 terrifying minutes, I kept that bird perfectly still while the operators, ghosts in the storm, scrambled aboard. The last man in, the team sergeant, paused, looked towards the cockpit, and gave a single sharp nod. It wasn't praise. It was a profound acknowledgement, a sign of absolute trust from one professional to another. It was a currency my family had never been able to afford. That's the core of the problem. My family didn't just misunderstand my job, they were incapable of understanding it. I remember my mother, Carol, pulling me aside after another one of my father's dismissive rants. "You know how your father is," she'd whispered, her hand on my arm, pleading. "His world is so black and white, so straightforward. Just let him have his moment with Kevin. It's easier that way for everyone." What she meant was that it was easier for her. Easier than standing up to him. Easier than creating waves. Her desire for a peaceful dinner table was more important than my reality. And in its own quiet way, that was the deepest cut of all. For years, I let them believe their version of my life because it was simpler. But their narrative had just collided with my reality. My father only respected things he could see and touch. So I decided it was time to show him. As my father's laughter echoed behind me, something inside me went perfectly still. The familiar sting of humiliation was gone, replaced by a chillingly clear sense of purpose. I walked away from the catered tables and the polite party chatter, my focus narrowing to a single operational problem. The doubt I had seen in the DSS agent's eyes was a contamination. It was a threat to the mission, and it had to be neutralized. This was no longer about my feelings. It was about re-establishing control. My hand went to the hardened, heavy comms device in my pocket, a piece of my real world. The objective was simple: erase the question mark my father had just placed over my competence. My credibility wasn't a matter of pride, it was a mission-critical asset that had been compromised. I pulled up the recall notification on the secure screen. The window was tight. A standard extraction meant getting a sterile vehicle to this remote location, driving to the nearest airfield and then flying out, a delay of at least 90 minutes. The mission would be scrubbed, the opportunity lost. Failure was not an option. My thumb moved deliberately across the screen, scrolling through a list of operational procedures. Most were routine, familiar, but then I found one I had only ever studied in simulations. Directive 7, Emergency Field Extraction from a Non-Secured Civilian Zone. It was a protocol of last resort, a high-cost, high-risk maneuver that consumed immense resources and required direct command authorization. It was designed for dire circumstances where the mission was more important than the budget or the potential for public exposure. For a moment, I hesitated. This was a very big lever to pull, but the justification was clear. This wasn't a tantrum, it was a tactical necessity. I began composing a coded message, my words precise and devoid of emotion. I was writing to General Hale, my commanding officer, a man who saw the world as a series of problems to be solved and had little patience for excuses. The message wasn't, "My dad hurt my feelings." It was, "Compromised interagency confidence. Need to demonstrate immediate operational readiness and asset capability to concerned party on site. Activating Directive 7 to meet critical timeline. Requesting immediate bird to current grid." I hit send. The reply came back in less than 15 seconds. It was just as precise. Justification approved. "Valkyrie 1, your bus is on the way. Hold the LZ." That was it. The pieces were in motion. This wasn't a trap for my family, it was a calculated piece of operational theater for the benefit of one man. My family, and their entire self-important party, were about to become the backdrop for a capabilities demonstration. The authorization came through in seconds. The system I had dedicated my life to was responding. My family thought I was leaving to catch a bus. They had no idea I had just called down the thunder. I returned to the party, a world of polite smiles and quiet judgments, and it felt like visiting a foreign country. My brother Kevin was still in the middle of his victory speech, using words like synergy and deliverables as if they were profound truths. The guests, my parents' friends mostly, nodded along with feigned interest. I ignored them all. My focus was on the wide, open lawn that stretched out beyond the pavilion. I walked towards its center, my shoes sinking slightly into the manicured grass, and I calmly checked my watch. The clock was ticking. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the DSS agent watching my every move, his expression unreadable but intensely focused. He knew something was about to happen. My father, of course, couldn't resist one last jab. He saw me standing alone, apart from the group, and his voice boomed across the lawn, thick with condescending amusement. "Leaving so soon, Avi?" he shouted, a smug laugh already forming. "Don't let us keep you. Bus stop's that way." A few of his friends chuckled along with him, enjoying the casual cruelty. I didn't even look at him. I just stared at the empty sky. There was nothing to say. The time for words, for trying to explain, for hoping to be understood, was over. All those years of being dismissed, of being the footnote in my own family story, were about to be redacted. It began as a feeling more than a sound. A low, rhythmic pulse I could feel in the soles of my feet. Whump, whump, whump. It was a heartbeat, deep in the earth, growing steadily stronger. Kevin's speech faltered as a few people glanced around, annoyed by the interruption. The sound grew, gaining texture, becoming a definitive, percussive roar that vibrated in your chest. All conversation stopped. Heads turned, no longer annoyed but confused, then alarmed, searching the sky for the source of the incredible noise. Then it broke through the tree line. It wasn't a helicopter, not in the way people think of them. It was a weapon, a matte black MH-60 Millions Blackhawk, stripped of all markings, moving with a terrifying and disciplined speed. It didn't glide. It sliced through the air with an apex predator's intent, its presence an immediate and shocking violation of the peaceful afternoon. It banked hard, its shadow falling over the entire party, a sudden dark eclipse that blotted out the sun. The roar was now a physical force, a deafening wave of sound that shook the very ground we stood on. The Blackhawk didn't land. It descended with impossible precision and entered a low, rock-steady hover 3 feet off the ground, directly in front of me. The rotor wash hit the party like a hurricane. Tablecloths were torn away, plates and glasses were blasted into the air, and Kevin's carefully prepared presentation notes vanished in a swirl of white confetti. People screamed, shielding their faces as the manicured lawn became a storm of flying debris. The side door was open, and framed within it were 2 crew chiefs in full combat gear, their faces obscured by dark helmet visors. They were perfectly still, all business, specters from a world my family refused to believe I inhabited. I finally turned to look at my father. The smug smirk was gone, melted away and replaced by a slack-jawed, hollow-eyed gape. His face, which had been so ruddy with pride moments before, was now pale with a brand of shock that bordered on terror. My mother, Carol, was clutching Kevin's arm, her knuckles white, her carefully maintained composure utterly shattered. They weren't looking at a machine. They were looking at an irrefutable fact, a truth so powerful it was literally blowing their world apart. This was real. In the eye of the storm, I felt a profound calm. I met my father's terrified gaze, and my voice was clear and steady, cutting through the incredible noise. "That's my bus." I turned away from him, my focus shifting to the only other person here who mattered. I looked at the DSS agent and gave him a sharp, confident nod. It was a silent, professional communication that said everything that needed to be said. "This is who I am. This is the capability at my command. Your team will be safe." He responded instantly with a nod of his own, his expression now one of pure, unadulterated respect. The question mark was gone. I turned and sprinted towards the waiting aircraft, the wind tearing at my clothes. With a practiced efficiency born of 1,000 repetitions, I grabbed the harness, clipped it into my belt, and was hauled aboard. The Black Hawk didn't linger. It tilted, the nose dipping aggressively, and surged into the sky with a force that pressed me back into my seat, vanishing over the horizon in seconds. My father spent my entire life thinking my job was a joke. In the end, it only took 30 seconds of rotor wash to blow that joke away forever. I wasn't there for what happened after we vanished over the horizon. I was already in my other world, my focus locked on the mission ahead. But the story of the aftermath trickled back to me later, through a debriefing with the DSS agent. He described a scene of absolute deafening silence on the ruined lawn, broken only by the wind rustling through the trashed pavilion. My family stood frozen, like statues in a diorama of a disaster scene. He said he walked over to my father, who was still staring at the empty sky, his face a hollow mask of shock. The agent didn't shout. His voice, he said, was cold and quiet. He held out his business card. "Your daughter is not a bus driver," he told my father. "You have no idea who she is." My father took the small, stiff card automatically, his eyes never leaving the sky. The agent turned and walked away without another word, leaving my father standing there, holding a tiny rectangular key to a universe he never knew existed, a universe in which he was not the center. I imagine him looking down at that card, at the official seal and the man's title, and feeling the weight of 30 years of willful ignorance collapse on him in a single, silent moment. 6 months later, the world had shifted on its axis. I stood at the head of a sterile briefing room, the air humming with the quiet energy of focused professionals. On the screen behind me were the schematics for our next mission, Operation Scythe. The room was filled with operators from different units, their faces serious, their attention entirely on me. The same DSS agent from the party was there, sitting in the front row. When I finished outlining the air insertion plan, he was the first to speak. His voice was loud and clear, meant for everyone in the room to hear. "My team's confidence in our air support is absolute, Major." He called me Major, not Avi. He didn't have to say my name. In that room, I only had one, Valkyrie. It wasn't a nickname. It was a call sign spoken with a quiet reverence, a title that had been earned in storms and on mountaintops, not given at birth. This was my new reality. There were no loud celebrations for a marketing deal, no desperate need for a father's approval. There was only the quiet, profound respect of peers who understood the stakes, who knew what it meant to put your life in someone else's hands. It was a respect I had never sought, but one I had built, mission by mission. My real family looked different now. They weren't people I was bound to by blood, but by trust forged under immense pressure. I found my family in a cavernous hangar late one night, after a grueling mission. The air smelled of jet fuel and ozone. My crew and I, Miller and the 2 young crew chiefs, sat on a crate sharing a bottle of water in near silence, too exhausted to speak. We were covered in sweat and grime, but a deep, unspoken camaraderie settled over us. We had been through the crucible together and brought everyone home. There was no need for grand speeches. We just knew. This was belonging. It was a foundation of competence and mutual reliance, a fortress against the kind of conditional love I had grown up with. One evening, I was in my office, plotting flight paths for a training exercise. My personal phone, so often silent, buzzed on the desk. I glanced at it. It was a text from my father. My breath caught in my throat for just a second, a ghost of an old reflex. The message was short. "Your mother and I saw a story on the news about a rescue in the mountains. Was that you?" It was the first time in my entire life he had ever asked about my work with anything that even resembled genuine curiosity, let alone respect. The invisible child part of me, the part that had starved for his validation for so long, felt a faint, pathetic flicker of triumph. But it was only a flicker. I looked at the message, at the words on the screen, and I felt a profound and peaceful quiet. The question mark in his text didn't need an answer from me. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. The desperate need to be seen by him was, finally, gone. My peace was no longer a hostage to his approval. I held my thumb over the screen, and with a simple, calm motion, I archived the message without replying. My eyes were already back on the flight map in front of me, tracing the lines that led to my future. My legacy was waiting for me in the sky. My father thought my ride was the bus, and in a way, he was right. I just drive the bus that goes to hell and back to make sure everyone else gets home safe. If you've ever had to prove your skills in a world that refused to see them, tell us your story in the comments. In this community, we know what a real ride looks like.